Recording in progress. Okay. Hey, this is Ed Dose at St. Vitus Studios, and today we're talking to Jonathan Plum of London Bridge Studios. So I want to introduce you and have you talk a little bit about the studio and what makes it so unique, and talk about some of the people that you've had come through.
Sure. So, well, this is a long history there. The studio opened in 1985 and sort of quickly became sort of the hub of the Seattle music scene, particularly with the grunge scene as that took off, kind of became the home of a lot of those bands. I'll give you like the general history was the studio opened in 85 by Rick and Raj Parashar, a couple brothers that lived up in the north end of Seattle. They built it in their early 20s, and Rick Parashar went on to be a music producer and produced a bunch of these bigger records. And I began working with Rick in the early 90s as his assistant, and then flash forward. We spent a decade working together on records, and then I left London Bridge, kind of went on my own, and then in 2006, me and another buddy that worked at London Bridge bought the place. So for our path, it was a little bit like buying your parents the home that you grew up in, you know.
Right.
Um, and then sadly, about 4 years ago, Rick passed away. Unfortunately, he was my mentor, and he was him and his brother Raj built the studio. We're still friends with Raj, but so we've owned the studio since 2006. And so Jeff Ott, he's my business partner, original business partner. He's an engineer and producer as well. And then about 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, 2010 or 11 or 12, we took on a third partner, Eric Lalevoix, who is also a super talented music producer and engineer. So now there's three of us, and we run the studio. And with all its ups and downs in the music industry, and we're managing to make it all work. And we're
Right.
super lucky and super blessed to have the space, and that we feel that the city's blessed to have this space. It's an amazing
Oh yeah.
room with some amazing gear, iconic gear.
Yep.
That it's made some iconic records, and we're kind of holding the torch, and also lucky to be on the bus, and
Right.
make records there.
Yeah. I've been there, and I've been there several times with different bands and things like that. And my son and I went through and toured with you. And there's a unique part of London Bridge that I'm going to show a photograph of, but there's a brick wall behind that and it's curved. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why it's curved and what makes that sound unique?
Yeah. So, when they built the studio, they hired a well-known acoustician, Jeff. I'm not going to remember his name right now, but he designed the studio up in Vancouver called Little Mountain Studio, which is famous for doing all this Bon Jovi and AC/DC. Unfortunately, that place is gone now. But apparently, our room is really similar to that room. So it's basically London Bridge resides in this big, giant box warehouse, basically. So when you step inside, it doesn't feel like you're in a warehouse. It feels like you're in this like vaulted ceilings and all this stuff.
Right.
So everything was built completely to spec to be a recording studio. So the designer like built in, physics and science of dimensions and angles and textures. So it's all highly developed to be a recording studio space. So
Right.
you walk in, and we do these historic tours now, and so any fan or musician for an hour can come tour the studio in the mornings, and
Good.
we will clap in the room, and you can hear kind of the ambience. But what I tell people is the way that room was built was that it's very scientific. There's no parallel walls, and the angles are just so that the sound waves bounce around. So like in a normal space, like I'm in, I'm at home right now in my living room, and you have these parallel walls, and the sound waves bounce back and forth, and you have buildup of certain frequencies or canceling out. So what the space in London Bridge is just really well balanced, so that you don't get any as the frequencies bounce around. It resonates in a balanced way, so
Right.
it doesn't really color the shape of instruments or sounds. It's neutral. And so you mentioned the brick wall. The way the space, if you have a photo, you can see that the room itself. It's kind of a longer, it's a rectangle that's longer. It's got big vaulted ceilings, and it's mostly wood. So it's hardwood and a lot of wood panels, some drywall, curtains. And then on the very back, on the little bit of a drum riser, there's a brick wall, and the brick wall itself has a bend to it. And again, it's funny because a lot of people see the brick wall and ask if that's permanent, like if it was there before the studio was built, because it looks so like permanent.
Right.
But the brick wall was in fact built with the design of the studio.
Good.
And basically, it acts as like a big reflector, it reflects, it breaks up the sound and kind of shoots it back into the room. And so sort of
Right.
there's this little balance. I think what's happening in the room is it's a medium-sized, bigger room that's relatively warm with all the hardwood, but then the brick wall is really bright, and so you get
Right.
this combination. And it's particularly with the drum sounds. A lot of times we'll put the drum, most times for rock especially, we'll put the drums in front of the brick, and what happens is the sound from the drums just shoots off that brick wall, kind of explodes into the room. And it's just got the way they designed the room. It's just got the perfect amount of decay for drums.
Right.
So it's just got this, it doesn't
Yeah.
doesn't linger too long, but it's substantial, and it's airy and it's open. So when you experience that room, and then you go back and listen to like albums, which we didn't talk about, some of the famous records that were done there, like Temple the Dog, or any of the most of the Alice in Chains records were done there, at Pearl Jam 10. What you're hearing on those records, a big part of the sound of those records is just that room sound.
Yeah.
That those records weren't, none of those grunge era records were really like highly produced. They were done really quickly and pretty raw. And I think that sort of was like the magic of that whole movement, was like
Right.
back to this basics, like very simple, raw. This is what a band sounds like all playing together. And the records that are done at London Bridge just have this really natural, open, kind of three-dimensional sound, and it's kind of that captures this energy of these humans performing together. And really,
Right.
a big part of that sound is the shape of that room and the way Rick was capturing them in the room.
Nice. Now the ones that I've been there when they're recording, they're live performances instead of piecemeal. Okay, here, do the drums, do the bass, do the guitar. Is that something that you prefer in that room, or is it just something that just happened while I was there, the times that I've been there?
Yeah, I mean that kind of brings up sort of the heart, I think, of what I think of as London Bridge, and back then and now in modern times, even more importantly, is that nowadays everybody, any musician, should have a home studio at this point. I mean, I have a home studio here. I've got my microphones, and I can go nuts all day long, layering and layering, and making myself sound incredible. But what we've learned, and it was sort of a funny path, because I think when we all, in the 90s, when I started really doing this professionally, we sort of dreamt of some of this technology that wasn't around then. You had to sort of record things live because you were limited by technology. We just had tape then. We couldn't edit like the way we could now.
Right.
So nowadays, it's very, very easy and simple for musicians to sit at home and layer things, to make things perfect. But what we've learned is that limitation kind of forces musicians and bands to play live, and allow these human interactions happen that sometimes equal mistakes, but other times equals something else. There's like an essence there that when you have more than one musician playing live together, their feel and their creativity meshes, and it has a bit of a heartbeat and a soul to it. So a song performance, it breathes, and you can sense musicians interacting with each other. And so that's what's kind of lacking in a lot of modern recordings these days, is that interaction between bands. And because of London Bridge, A, the history, and B, the way it's set up with the big rooms, and there's glass everywhere, so we can maybe isolate instruments, but everyone can see each other and still create that live feel. And so,
Yeah.
sorry, this is kind of long-winded,
No,
but
no, you're
it's,
good.
it's a great topic, because that's really the spirit of what we're doing at London Bridge. Is we really focus on that live performance, because it's really difficult to do that in a home studio or in a smaller studio properly. So
Right.
I think there's almost like a backlash now. The home studio thing has been going on for a decade now, or probably longer, and it's really amazing. It's really wonderful. But I think a lot of bands have recognized that they can't. Maybe if their favorite record is like a Led Zeppelin record or a Who record or something, you just can't do that at home. You have to be in a bigger acoustic space with proper things. So those are the kind of clients we typically get. bands that are seeking to record in that old-fashioned way because they recognize there's something magical about. I mean, it should seem obvious, but when a band
Yeah.
plays live together, it's a different feel, and so
Right.
we're good at that. That's what we do, and we don't always do it that way, but we can do it that way, and most musicians can't do that at home. So
Right.
that's a big
Right.
part of what we do is we allow musicians we create a really really awesome environment for musicians to hear each other and see each other and play live together.
Good. Yeah, I've had very the times that I've been there, I really love the way everything organically, moved around. I really enjoyed that, and I saw the uniqueness of that happening during the recordings, and you can see the members of the bands working off of each other, and I think it's really special. Instead of having a drum track, a bass track, and a guitar track, and the vocal track, where they're not, like you just said, where they're not bouncing off of each other and working organically. It's more like very technical, where it's
Yep.
it's more like a puzzle piece that's, okay, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, and instead when you get a live performance, it just goes together as it works, and I think
Yeah,
it's
it's almost like there becomes almost a third element that
right.
becomes sort of the soul of the song because
Yeah,
yeah, it's funny. I think all of us engineers coming up through if you were around long enough before the Pro Tools and the computer editing, when that capability first came out, we're like, oh my god, we can go in and fix everything. Like, God,
yeah,
this is so nice. But then we realized something was missing. And
yeah,
so like when a band's playing live, it's like kind of the sum is greater than the single parts, and so
right, right,
I'm still constantly reminded. Like I'll hear a band play live, and like the take is great, and I'll go in and isolate things, and I'll hear mistakes all over the place, but like
right,
it doesn't matter. And I think it's so easy nowadays with a computer to like you can even see the mistake, or the computer will
yeah,
tell you there's a mistake,
yeah.
but then you listen like I don't know, that's fine, that's cool.
It works. Yeah,
Yeah.
it
So there's a
absolutely
bit of it.
works.
It's like a reverse engineering art, of like
Right.
knowing when to, the computer screen might be telling you this is fast or out of key, or like, well, no,
Just
it's not. It
do it
sounds great.
anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's your education with that? Did you go to school to learn engineering? How did that come about?
Yeah. So I came up in an era just when these colleges were getting accredited. It was like probably, well, let's see, like late 80s, early 90s. I think the only school at the time was Full Sail in Florida. You could get a 4-year
Yeah,
bachelor degree in recording arts.
right there
So
in
that was,
Winter Park.
oh, is that where it is?
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I had never been there. That's my daughter, by the way. She's heading out the door. Bye. Um, so that was sort of what I was gonna do out of high school. I was one of those kids lucky enough to find my passion at around 16. I had a guitar teacher, very wonderful guitar teacher. Well, his name is Rick Knotts. He was the guitar player for Rail, a really awesome Seattle band in the
Nice.
80s, and I was lucky enough to take guitar lessons with him. And he did a little workshop for all his students. He booked 3 hours of studio time at Triad Studios with engineer Tom Hall, basically just for his students. I think we all paid $30 to buy three
Oh
hours of
wow.
time, and I knew nothing. And I walked into this room, and I just saw all the knobs, and then I heard they did a little like test recording with Rick and Tom, and I remember hearing how clear the sound was coming out of the speakers, and it just all of it just captured my imagination, excitement for recording music, and I didn't know what any of it was, but um, so that was, I think I was 15 or 16, and that just put me on a really clear path. Like, man, I don't know what any of that is. I think it's the coolest thing I've ever seen, and that's what I want to do. So I, since then recognized that most people don't often have that kind of like direction.
Right.
Anyway, so yeah, from that point on, I just was really hyper focused on that, and
So
I ended up not. I was gonna go to school. I was gonna go to Full Sail. I was taking all my general credits here. I went to Central for a year, and then I went to Shoreline Community College, and then I landed a job at London Bridge. I
oh
dropped out of
wow,
college.
really? Wow,
Yeah.
just like that. That's great.
I mean, I was
Yeah.
working in other studios, and I just slowly, like it was just sort of things aligned, but it turned out I knew a bunch of people that knew the owners of London Bridge. I had never met them, but I had friends of friends, and um, I think, I mean, it must have been 90 or something like that. I knew I had gotten word on the street was they were looking for an assistant engineer, and I
Wow.
just was all over it and used
Yeah.
all my contacts and
Called everybody. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and I got in, and I got the job. And then
Nice.
yeah, and so there was a really funny period of time where I was still going to Shoreline Community College. I was living at my parents' house, going to community college in the morning, and and then I'd have to leave. I'd have to quit class early to get to London Bridge to clean the toilets and record Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam.
Oh
And
my
I was
God.
like, all right, this is probably don't need to be doing school right now.
Yeah, there's priorities that you need to work on. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So tell us about some of the albums that you've worked on and some of the things that you've enjoyed coming in.
Yeah, I mean it's gosh, at this point it's just a long history, but when I started out, um it was the golden era of grunge was just kind of like reaching its peak. So I just hit it. The timing was just perfect. I was a little young for I was younger than all the musicians, but when I first started working at London Bridge, I think I was 19, maybe early 20, and I think the first week I worked there, Alice in Chains was on the calendar. We used to have this big paper calendar, and I remember seeing
Yeah.
Alice in Chains, and I was already a huge fan of these bands. So it was like Alice in Chains was in one week, and then a few weeks later was Pearl Jam, and then Candlebox, and then it was just like one after another, and I was just like the happiest kid. I
That's
thought I was the
great.
coolest kid and the happiest kid ever because
Oh yeah,
I,
absolutely.
I got suddenly just got to work with all my favorite bands, and I knew Rick was before I met Rick, before I even knew what London Bridge was, I was in love with these records. I was in love with the sounds that was coming from that studio, and
Right.
so I got to get in there, and I got to have the guy that owned it and created those sounds. He's like, do this, do that, and do that, and that's how we got the sounds. And so I just learned firsthand from Rick
Yeah,
how it was
that's
done, and
incredible.
yeah,
Yeah,
it was awesome. So you mentioned Alice in Chains was probably one of the first bigger bands I worked with, and then Pearl Jam came in, and I mentioned Candlebox. Sweaty Nipples made a big record there. I didn't work on Temple of the Dog, but that was done there. Soundgarden, Louder Than Love was done there. That was before my time. Zach Wilde did Pride and Glory, his first record there. I was on that. Yeah, Alice in Chains,
he and I,
Sap, Jar
Zach and I
Flies.
have a mutual friend, Andy Beach, who built his guitars
Oh, for who?
for Zach.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, Andy Beach. I don't know if you know him or not. I'm interviewing him this coming week, and he's a luthier that hand builds these guitars and was Zach Wilde's guitar tech for years and years and years. So
Oh,
yeah,
cool. I
yeah,
don't know him, but I mean Zach is a force of nature and
yeah,
a really really fun guy to be around. So
yeah,
that'll be a
yeah.
fun interview.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Hey, there's two instruments that were in your studio. There's a snare drum that's in the back room that apparently everybody uses, and the piano that is in the studio that everybody uses. So, can you tell us the snare drum story was kind of cool. So, why don't you tell me a little bit about the snare drum?
Well, I assume we're talking about the Keplinger. Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So Greg Keplinger, he's a local artist and drum maker. Well, he's a drummer, uh, an amazing drummer, but he's also a drum maker and sort of a metalworks guy. And apparently, the story goes he was out of material to make drums, and he found this steel piping that was like at a construction site or something. He took it back to his shop and cut it up, and out of necessity made this drum, and it turned out to sound good. So he kept kind of refining it, and he ended up it's quite thick, and I can't remember like the details, but it's a steel drum, and it weighs like 30 pounds, and and iconically, or like if it's a Keplinger because he does this on every single one of his drums. Is on the inside he stamps the words "not fragile," and uh, that's kind of his thing.
So you use them as weapons during the
Yeah,
course.
and it's actually a kind of an ugly looking drum, and in some ways it's almost an ugly sounding drum, but uh, it's the loudest drum I've ever heard. It has this, like, it hits you in the chest. And I think for rock, it's kind of become a Seattle thing. A lot of like Seattle rock drummers have Keplingers. If you ever see a drummer play this sort of just like bland silver looking steel drum, it's probably a Keplinger. They're
Nice.
just the loudest things ever, and I think it's a perfect match for our room. So we had him custom build one for London Bridge, and
Wow.
yeah,
And,
it's a great. And what's funny too is a lot of drummers that come in, they'll sometimes I'll recommend it. They'll bring their own drums in, but maybe we're having trouble getting a good sound out of it, and I'll say, well, why don't we try using this drum? And I'll bring out the Kepling, and they'll look at it like, oh man, that thing's ugly. I don't want to play that. And then after they've heard it and recorded with it, they're asking me, man, how do I get one of these?
right. Nice. And the grand excuse me, the grand piano that's in there, who's used that, and how did you come about that, and why did you choose that one?
Sure. Well, I mean, Rick and Raj bought that, I'm sure, when they opened the studio. So it's just a kind of standard Yamaha Grand C7. It's a full Grand, and actually quite standard. I think most studios in Seattle have the exact same piano. I know Avast does, and I think Bob Lang does as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing special about it other than it's just been around London Bridge since '85. So when you think of all the records that were made there, some of the iconic things like Mother Love Bone's "Chloe Dancer" was done on that piano.
Wow.
Which, if you ever want to learn Chloe Dancer, a little hint, it's all in the black keys, which
Oh,
makes
wow.
it kind of easier.
Right.
So then all the Pearl Jam, like Black and all those piano parts, that's all that piano. And then more recently, Macklemore's Downtown, do, do, ding, 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 ding,
Yeah.
ding, that's the London Bridge piano as well. It kind of has a brighter, pingy tone to it, so
Yeah.
it is sort of identifiable in that way. And we still
Nice.
have it.
Nice.
Yep.
So the studio is located. Tell us where the studio is located. Tell us
Well,
about the
that's
tour.
classified.
That's classified. Okay.
No, I'm
So,
just kidding.
and
I'm
then,
kidding. It's in Shoreline, which is just we're literally on the border of King County to whatever it is, Snohomish, whatever is north of us.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just
So,
Ballinger Way.
and the tours that people can go on, do they, do you charge for that, or are you still doing that with COVID?
We
Uh,
are, and it's actually become kind of a substantial part of our business, and sort of part of the story for us as London Bridge is, you know, every fan or musician should know that the music industry has substantially changed. You know, it started changing in the early 2000s, but for big studios like us to survive, it's really challenging because musicians aren't making the kind of money that they used to, and record labels aren't making the money that they used to. So that's obviously trickled down and affected recording studios. On top of the home studio revolution, and you know, every friend has a home studio at this point. So for us, taken a lot to keep our doors open. You know, we have this classic Neve mixing board that is incredibly expensive to maintain, and
yeah,
all the gear, yada yada. So we've a couple things we've done to sort of stay open and also stay reasonably priced for our you know, Seattle musician community is we do these tours. So we offer a 1 hour tour. It's $55 per person, and we take them in through the studio in the morning, and we talk about all the history, and then we get them in the room, and we listen to the room and talk about the room and talk about what the process is like, and kind of like what we're talking about right now. And then
right.
we take them into the control room, and then we start listening to music, and it's really fun. And we've been doing it long enough now that we've had people literally from all over the world, and it
Good.
ends up being quite profound because a lot of these people, you know, maybe grew up somewhere else. Like I've met people like from East Germany or South America, and heard their stories about how they first heard like Nirvana, Teen Spirit, and Pearl Jam, you know, Even Flow, and how they got incredible stories of like bootlegging cassette tapes and all this stuff, and how it affected their childhood in a totally different country, you
Yeah.
know, and then for them to come back and into London Bridge where those recordings were made, it's like really heavy. People cry, and
Wow.
yeah,
Really?
it's pretty wild,
Yeah.
and it makes, you know, for someone like me that's been there for so long, and you know, kind of is part of the scene. It's such an awesome reminder to know that the things that we've done and that's been done in that building how important it's been. So that it's
Right.
gone around the entire world and affected people's lives
Yeah.
everywhere, and in such positive ways. Like that's
Yeah.
the magic of music. People
Oh yeah.
it helped people, that weren't
Right.
part of Seattle, weren't part of the scene at all, but it meant something to them. And something that's really, really cool that's happening right now is we've been doing the tours now for probably like a decade. Um, is for the most part, it's the people that take the tours are sort of our age people, kind of
Right.
getting, uh, kids that were kids in the 90s. But what we're noticing is there's a big shift in that it's the younger kids now are the ones dragging their parents in to take the tour. That
Right.
there's a whole new generation. And I just think
Yeah.
that's the coolest thing when I meet like a 13-year-old or 14-year-old that thinks that Alice in Chains music is important to them.
Right.
They're hearing
Yeah.
something in that's meaningful to them right now. And I
Yeah.
can just see it. I can just see like they're kind of maybe they're sort of awkward and don't fit in there, and it's like, oh, that's it, like.
Right.
And
Right.
I just think that's so wonderful that music that was made that that long ago is still important.
Nice. Now,
Yeah.
for the people who are watching who don't know Seattle, Shoreline is north of Seattle. So if you come into Seattle, uh, Shoreline is a fairly well-known place in Seattle, and you can certainly find London Studios. And I'm going to put the links to London Studio down below, and your contact information so people can get a hold of you and things like that for the tours that are coming into town. And now that Seattle is starting to open up a little more, we're going to get a lot more people coming in that have waited for the last 2 years to come and visit. And contact John and come and see the studio. I mean, it's really cool to go in there, and I've done it with my son. And like I said, I've been in there with several bands taking photographs and things like that. But every time you go in there, there's a feeling of you're involved in history in this studio, and it's very, very cool, and it's very, very worth it to go through. And Jonathan is a very, very knowledgeable individual, and he's got some great stories, and you really need to go through the tour. And you've also got a donation board uh, on the back of the board. So can you tell us a little bit about that and how people can get involved with that and why you've done that?
Yeah, cool. Thanks for bringing that up. Yeah,
Yeah.
so how we were talking earlier about how the music industry's changed, and for us keeping the doors open has been quite the challenge. So the tours has been one thing that helps sort of keep the business solid, but another thing. So we have this great big vintage 1973. It's called a Neve mixing board. It was built in England by this guy, designed by this guy named Rupert Neve, who only recently passed away. He was in his like mid to late 90s or something.
Wow.
I think he passed away last year. But the board, it's this sort of historic piece of audio equipment. It was the same board that resided in Sound City before they closed down. This is a recording
Yeah.
studio in north of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Dave Grohl produced a movie about the studio, and in the movie he does a really great job explaining why this equipment is so important. But it was hand wired and made at a time when the quality was just so good. So with Sound City, that studio went on under. We lost the studio because the music industry changed, but it was the studio where Nevermind was recorded. Foo Fighters, not Foo Fighters, Nirvana.
Right.
And after the studio closed, Dave Grohl went in and bought that mixing board and had it refurbished and put it in his own private studio. So it
Wow.
turns out we have the same mixing board that Sound City has. They're all custom made, so they all look a little bit different, but it's the same components.
Right.
And it just has this really wonderful, unique sound. You can't emulate it. People try, but it's made from materials that you can't source anymore,
Right.
and it's a maintenance hog. It was built in 1973. I don't think it was designed to last as long as it has. So it just takes, and it's kind of like I always the joke is it's like. If you've ever seen Happy Days, if you remember Happy Days and the
Yeah.
Fonz and the jukebox, the
Yeah. Go.
jukebox would break down every once in a while, and Fonz had this way of just hitting it right in the right spot that would make it work again. So the Neve board is a little bit like that. It's quirky, but you have to. It's a special knowledge to work on it because it's not normal electronics. It's like old and the way that the metals corrode and all this stuff.
Right.
Anyways, the maintenance got so expensive on it, and we couldn't afford to keep up on it. So we were going to sell it and get something more
Cool.
modern. And that we kind of had to do that. Like we didn't really have a choice. But someone came up with this idea of selling plaques for the community to help donate to help it get it refurbished. And
Yeah.
so we have a friend as Read Signs is this incredible graphic design company that they're just so clever. But they made us, maybe you can show a photo of it. But it's a plexiglass see-through uh, panel that's on the back of the mixing board, so you can now look in and see the guts of the mixing board. And then people donated to the board and had their name engraved.
Right.
It's top lit with
Yeah.
LEDs, so it shines and it's amazing. So on the launch, we did this I think 6 7 years ago. We sold quite a few. We didn't sell as many as we wanted to, but we sold enough to have most of the board refurbished.
Oh,
And
nice.
now we're still selling them, and that money still goes to keep the thing maintained. So
That's
in
awesome.
that respects, the studio is very much like a community studio. Like we wouldn't really exist without the community's help.
Right.
And we've had fans for the right person. It's really exciting for them to have their name up there, and they're kind of become
Oh,
part of our
sure.
family and help keep the place going and help. I love that idea that a brand new band from down the street, 16, 17-year-old kids who might think Alice in Chains is the best band in the world, they can
Right.
get in and still use the same exact gear that those records are made of. And it's not, we're affordable. It's,
Yeah.
um, a band of 4 or 5 people can easily afford a day in there. And
Yeah.
we think that's really cool. And it's important,
I
it's important to the music community to have that.
Oh, yeah. And like I said, if anybody's interested worldwide, because I've got musician friends all over the world. So if anybody's watching this who's interested in learning more about London Bridge, get in touch with me or get in touch with Jonathan, and we'll talk about how we can get some studio time set up for everybody. But it's very unique. John, like I said, Jonathan is very, very knowledgeable, and the people that work there, it's very comfortable situation, and you're going to have a great, great time recording there. So I really appreciate you coming on today, Jonathan, and I will put all the links down below. And if you're interested and you want to see more of these videos, please subscribe to my channel. And I've got a whole bunch of views, but very little subscriptions because I never ask people to subscribe to the channel. So I keep forgetting to do that.
Right, right.
Um,
Subscribe
so
here.
that's right. Subscribe here. Yeah, just all over the place. So yeah, I'm not very technical about all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of did this to give uh, people who are working through COVID, and musicians and artists and actors a little more investment in their skill and their art and things like that. And that's what I wanted to bring out, kind of an inspiration, and say, hey man, keep going, keep working at what you're doing, because this is going to pass, and every generation has their big hill that they need to get over, and this is apparently ours. So you just got to keep working and keep doing it, and with help with people like Jonathan, you can certainly get stuff done and get it done right. And he's the I one of my best friends that I grew up with, Bryant Jackson, is an engineer who went to Berkeley, and he worked with Jeff Buckley, and
Hmm.
the things that there's a certain mindset to an engineer, and it's funny because I know several engineers, and they all have this same kind of mindset. It's so bizarre. You can
Or
if you're talking to somebody, you can tell they're a guitarist or a bassist or a drummer, and you can tell when somebody's an engineer. And Jonathan, you're it. So uh, just
for better or worse.
just get in touch with me, and get in touch with Jonathan, and we'll certainly help you out with everything that we possibly can. And Jonathan, if you ever need anything from me, photography work or anything, please get in touch, and I'll be glad to come by and help you out. You're not too far away, so just give me
Awesome,
a
man.
holler. Yep.
Well, thanks for having me. It's fun chatting.
Yeah,
Good
I
seeing you.
appreciate it. And I'll put all your information down below so everybody can find you. But thank you very much, Jonathan, for coming on.
You're
Thanks.
welcome.
Yep. See ya.